Okay, our application is up. So let's see if we can access it in our browser. First, we need to find the IP of our server. We can go to DigitalOcean's control panel, or we can run Docker machine ls. So here's the IP address of our web server. So let's copy this. Now, back to our browser, let's go to this address. Nothing is here. What is going on? That's a great opportunity for troubleshooting. So our front-end application is not up, but what about our backend application? Our backend application is available on port 3001/API. Okay, so our API is running. We can also go to API/movies. So all movies are fetched from our database. That part of the application is working perfectly fine. The only problem is in the front end. So back to the terminal, let's look at our running containers. Okay, so here's the web container running Nginx. Now, if you look at the status column, you can see that this container is restarting. Let me resize my window to show you this message. So, okay, it looks really ugly, but I will do my best. So here is the web container, okay? And you can see that this container is constantly restarting. That's because of the restart policy that we applied. So something is wrong in this container. It keeps crashing and restarting. So what is the next thing we need to do? We need to look at the logs. So let me resize this one more time. Good. So let's bring up the container list again. All right. We need the ID of this container to look at its logs. So Docker logs, and here's the container. Good. So take a look. There's so much going on here. All these repetitive messages are saying the same thing. We have a permission problem. And here we're getting a warning saying the user directive makes sense only if the master process runs with the super user privileges. The reason we're encountering this issue is because we're running Nginx with a non-root user. So back to our production Docker file in our front-end project. Look, this is where we're creating a custom non-root user. Now, we can definitely run Nginx with a non-root user, but setting it up involves a bit of configuration and some Linux work. It really goes outside the scope of this course. If you're interested, you can read the documentation of Nginx on Docker Hub. So to go forward, I'm going to remove these two lines and run Nginx using the root user. Of course, as I told you before, this is not the right way to do this, but I don't want us to get distracted from what we are doing. So now we have to go back to the terminal and redeploy our application. So docker compose -f docker compose.prod.yaml. We're going to bring the application up and use the build switch to rebuild each image. Okay, it's going to take a while, so I'll be right back. All right, our application is up. Let's verify that all containers are running. Great. So now if you look at the status column, you can see that the web container is running. Great. So back to the browser. All right, we can see the homepage of our application, but we cannot fetch the movies. So we need to troubleshoot one more time. Look, I deliberately included these issues in this lesson so you learn troubleshooting skills. I could have executed these steps in a way that you could never see these, and everything looked so clean and polished. So how do we troubleshoot this? We're going to bring up Chrome DevTools and look at the requests sent to our API. So here's Chrome DevTools. In the Network tab, we select SHR to look at our API requests. Then we refresh by pressing Command and R on Mac or Control and R on Windows. Okay, here's the bad boy. Take a look. Look at the URL of this request. It's going to localhost port 3001. This is only for development. Our front-end application running on the web shouldn't send a request to localhost. It doesn't make sense. So back to our project, let's go to the front-end folder, source, services, and api.js. This is where we have all the code for talking to our API. So look at this line of code. We are saying, if this environment variable is set, use it. Otherwise, use localhost port 3001/API as the default value. So what we need to do now is to set this environment variable in our production Docker file. So we're going to go to dockerfile.prod for frontend. Now, in the build step, this is where we need to set the environment variable. Because in React, environment variables are processed during the build stage. So the build tool that comes with React reads all these environment variables and hard codes them in the final code. Okay. So Before running the build, we can say environment. Here's the key. We're going to set this to the IP address of our server. So let's run Docker machine ls. All right. Here's the IP of our web server. We're going to grab that. First, we'll start with HTTP. We add the IP. Now the port is 3001. And here we should also add /API. So save the changes. Now we need to redeploy. So here's our last compose command. Again, we're using the build option, so our images are rebuilt. Let's go with that. All right, perfecto. So let's go back to the browser, refresh, and here are all the movies. Great. So our application is up and running on our internet. So let's quickly recap. If we put aside all the little issues that we encountered in this lesson, deploying Docker applications is actually very easy. First, we have to activate a Docker machine. So we run Docker machine ls. Let's say we want to deploy to this machine. This could be our production machine. We could have another Docker machine for our test environment. We could have another one for our staging environment, and so on. Once we know where we want to deploy this application to, we run Docker machine env with the machine name. So we get the command that we need for activating that machine. We execute this command. Good. Now this machine is active. So any commands that we execute using this Docker client will be sent to the Docker engine on the target machine. So here we can bring up our application using Docker compose up. As simple as that. And if you think this is too tedious and you have to execute multiple commands, you can simply put these commands in a shell script like deploy.sh. And every time you want to deploy, you just run that script. So in that script, you're going to activate your production machine and then run Docker compose up with the right options.